Welcome back. In this step, let's look at a few scenarios related to virtual machine. How can you automatically scale up and scale down VMs? We can use scale sets and we can enable auto scaling. How can you protect VMs from data center failures? I have a set of virtual machines. Even if a specific data center fails, I don't want the entire application to go down. How can we do that? What we can do is to deploy them to multiple availability zones. To protect from a single data center failure, you can deploy to multiple availability zones. So even if one of the data centers in an availability zone fails, you can serve the application from another availability zone. How much availability do you get by deploying 2 or more virtual machines in 2 or more availability zones in the same region? We already discussed about this. It's 99.99%. How can you perform disaster recovery for your VMs? We looked at it as well, site recovery. You can use site recovery to configure a secondary region, and whenever there's a problem with the primary region, you would have disaster recovery performed and the VM would be copied over to the second region. How can you reduce your cost for your VMs? We looked at a few options. Auto scaling, which is elasticity, reserved and spot instances. Another factor that you need to typically consider when you talk about cost is selecting the right region. One of the important things to remember is that your costs for your VMs are not stable. Costs vary with time, and also costs vary from region to region. Some regions might be cheap, some regions might be expensive. If I go over to virtual machines and let's say add a virtual machine, I'll choose Compute RG and let's give it a name and let's say review and create. And over here you can see that B1S is 0.7493 Indian rupees per hour. This is applicable to East US region. So it's 0.7493. Now if I go back to previous and go back to basics, and let's say I would change the region. I would change it to, let's say, Central India. And I would say review and create. You'd see that there is a change in price. This is 0.8069 INR per hour. There is a small change in price over here. If you want to see all the details around prices, the best place to go is pricing calculator. If you do a Google for Azure pricing calculator, you'd land up on this. And this is where you can configure and estimate the costs for your Azure products. So you can select virtual machines, and virtual machine is now added. I can go and say view, and it would take me down to the virtual machines, and you can see the cost. So you can see that for the specific configuration that we have in here, which is D2V3 Windows in West US, the compute price for pay as you go is about $85 per month. And let's change it to some other region. Let's just say I would change it to South India. And you can see that it increases up to $98. You can see that there is a substantial increase. As we discussed earlier, if you go for 1 year reserved, you'd get it cheaper. So you would get it for $62 US. If you go for 3 years reserved, you would see that it is further cheap. It goes down to $39.53. So this is a good place where you can go and explore the costs related to all the services. We'll talk about pricing calculator in depth a little later as well. So to reduce the cost for your VMs, you can consider elasticity, auto scaling, reserved instances, spot instances, and making sure that you are choosing the right region for your workload. Next scenario, will you be billed if you stop a VM? The answer is yes. Even though you stop the VM, there is disk storage which is attached with your VM. You need to pay for it. And that's the reason why the best practice is to delete all the resources that are associated with your VM if you don't want to get billed. Next scenario, will 2 VMs of same size always cost the same? We already talked about it. The answer is no. Price changes with time, and also price is different in different regions. And that's the reason why 2 VMs of the same size might not cost the same always. The last question is, how can you know who performed a specific action on a specific VM or a scale set? The way you can do that is by using activity logs. These activity logs are kept for 90 days. Where can you look at activity logs? Let's go back to virtual machines. And let's pick up our second virtual machine, and over here you can actually type in activity. It's right here. This is where you can go in and look at all the activity logs around that specific virtual machine. So you can see start virtual machine, deallocate, restart. So all the events, you can see in here. The same thing is also available on most other resources. So if I go to scale sets, virtual machine scale sets, we have a virtual machine scale set which is created, and this also has an activity log. So you can see that there are a lot of activities which are logged under the activity log for the VM scale set. I'm sure you had a wonderful time talking about virtual machines in the last few steps. Our goal with this section was to give you a very good introduction to cloud computing with virtual machines. As you can see, setting up applications with virtual machines is not a very easy task. You need to configure a lot of things to get your applications running on virtual machines. And that's where we would start focusing on managed services starting next section. I'm sure you're having a wonderful time, and I'll see you in the next step.